O.R. Tambo was given the most difficult tasks in the ANC to go and lead the African National Congress from exile. And remember, this African National Congress is not only in exile, but he's leading from exile.
The context was that in 1959, Chief Albert Luthuli, the then President General of the ANC, had called on the world to boycott South Africa. So we were leading a boycott campaign. President Tambo then therefore arrived at a time when the movement is banned in South Africa as a result of the state of emergency. The ANC is now illegal, and it has become imperative that our actions in the international arena are stepped up to, one, contains the South African apartheid regime in its repressive activity, two, find support for the movement itself, and three, engage in the way the movement has now got to adjust to these new circumstances where the organization itself is illegal. Former President O.R. task was to lead that process.
He always listened. Whether a junior member of an ANC, somebody from the opposition, a president of a country that was saying apartheid South Africa is our ally, it's part of the democratic world. He always listened. He never reacted. He said, you know, we're negotiating, but do we understand where those people come from? Otherwise, it's a dialogue of the deaf. So don't just talk about dialogue. If you don't understand where they come from and what they are saying and why they are saying it, you will never break through.
We knew that Tambo's leadership would be acceptable to all and that he would be capable of uniting all the forces.
His whole approach was build up the number of friends you have and neutralize the enemies, and if necessary, create space for the enemies now to enter into dialogue and transform and change.
What we are asking the world to do is not to solve our problems for us, but to assist us solve those problems. We have tried to ask that that assistance should be given in such a way that we can solve the problems peacefully. That has not been forthcoming. And we are continuing to try and solve the problems with the methods that are available to us.
People would always say, here is a man of integrity, a man of modesty, a man you could do business with because you could trust him. You know, there was no demagoguery. He tailored every speech to the audience. So if it was UN General Assembly, he would articulate it all in terms of the UN Convention of Human Rights. If it was a German government, it would be different. If it's a Swedish academic audience, it would be tailored for them.
There is enough to show that the people of the world, even the people of this country, certainly the people of Africa and Asia and Latin America and their good supporters, have had enough.
He was meticulous about language. If people who wrote speeches or prepared documents, he would go through them and he would say, now, you're using this word. What exactly do you mean? This was very typical of him.
The biggest torture that you could have to, or the ordeal under OR was to write something with him, because don't think that there were 10 or 20 drafts, it was something like 40 or 50. You know, it just seemed to go on.
I remember one evening, there was a house that was being used, and I saw, must have been about 11:30 at night, and Chris Harney is running away from that house. And Chris ran away from nothing. He was the bravest of the brave. But he said he'd been working for 5 hours on one of Oliver Tambo's speeches, and he was an absolute perfectionist, and the words had to be exactly right and convey the meaning exactly the right way. And he said, enough's enough. He said, I'm fleeing. And I was amused, you know, at this brave commander fleeing from yet one more correction of a script.
In South Africa, I should feel that I'm a human being in that country. And I don't feel so now at all. I feel I'm a stranger, a foreigner, and at best, an animal.
O.R. worked tirelessly to remind the world of the people on Robben Island. They were, in fact, the symbol of the struggle.
One time I heard him say, "I miss the bull." And I said, "Who's that?" And he said, "Nelson." Because if Nelson was here, he would just charge. And so I know he missed them. He missed them big time. He had his own loneliness, you know. He was the continuation of the tradition. Luthuli had said to him, "When I go, Oliver, I want you to lead this movement." And he saw his role as a continuation of all these generations who had fought for the struggle.
In the 1980s, it was decided that we needed an international campaign to release political prisoners, because by now there were thousands in prison at all sorts of levels. We realized that without a face, you couldn't launch a major international campaign.
That was Tambo's strategy, and he profiled the struggle around Mandela.
But we were told, ANC collective leadership, you can't do that. So we then had to inform Lusaka. They informed the island. Then eventually came back, yes, but you can use the name of Mandela, but Nelson Mandela and all political prisoners. And Oliver Tambo flew to Addis Ababa, which was the headquarters of the Organization of African Unity, and launched the campaign.
You would never talk about the struggle of South Africa without talking about Mandela.
I mean, you know, Oliver had a hell of a time. Disappointments, endless disappointments, snobbing, writing to a head of state and say, "I want to come and see you," and so on, and getting a brush off again and again and again. I'm told that when Oliver went to see some heads of state in Africa, they would make him wait for 5 hours in a waiting room. A lesser man would have broken or given up. I'm convinced. I certainly would have given up.
O.R. Tambo was a very courageous person. Once it became necessary to take a decision, it became very clear that he owned it, and that he put the weight of his office, of his authority behind it.
A quiet person in a loud movement, a soft person in a strong, hard movement. And I think every struggle, every movement needs people like that.
The role that he played in forging one of the biggest global movements, I think it's one of the major achievements that anyone globally had ever made, the anti-apartheid movement.
He established the ANC, even though so many were in prison, so many were underground, so many were in exile in different countries, as a movement, and kept it alive from 1960 till 1990, when we were unbanned. No other movement that I have heard of didn't split, didn't fragment, didn't have alternate leaders.
It is indeed our collective responsibility to rid our country of the cause of conflict, deprivation, and disunity, which has earned it the distaste of the rest of humanity.